So you too can have the Frank Capra experience. He used a Contax back in the day, back in the when he was doing the wartime shots. You too can have that experience with one of these cameras. A very, very beautiful thing, and I'm just going to work that shutter once again just because it's so lovely. Well, hello once again everybody, and thank you for checking in. Let me just check my sounds right. Yes, that's about right. Well, now, I almost sold this camera recently. It's a big camera, it's a heavy camera, it's a rather unwieldy camera. I'm holding it in my hand now, and when I compare it to other cameras, it does have quite a bit of weight and quite a bit of bulk in it, but I didn't, and the reason I didn't is because it's a rangefinder, and I do love rangefinders. I've really got a soft spot for them. Rangefinders have loads of virtues, and today I'm going to show you how to find some nice cost-effective ones, or some slightly more fancy ones if you want to go a bit more complex or a bit upmarket. They start from around £40 and they go all the way up to £300, maybe £400 at the very top end if you're paying for something, you know, absolutely pristine in brand spanking new order. Virtues of rangefinders, well, they're small. I mean, look at these cameras. These are not big cameras. You know, the biggest one is this one, the one that I nearly got rid of. This one is comparable in size, and there's some really small ones as well, like this little Leica. So they're generally small cameras, and they don't have too much bulk to them as a rule. They tend to be quite simple cameras. They don't overwhelm you with technical operations. The older ones are manual. They start from, gosh, late 1920s right the way up to, in fact, you can still buy a film rangefinder from Leica if you want one. They're not very complex, so they tend to be pretty simple in operation. The older manual ones, plus the later ones with a bit of automation, still they'll give you a nice simple photographic experience. They tend to be pretty silent as well. I mean, listen to the shutter sound of this one. This is a Zorky 1, and this is not a very fancy rangefinder. It's you know, it was cheap in its day, and they're still cheap now. This is fairly quiet. Hear that? That's a real quiet snick, and when you're on the street, that's invaluable. There are a lot of situations where it's really useful to have a nice quiet shutter, and generally the rangefinders do. They're not all quiet. The Zorky 4, where are we? Here's the Zorky 4. This has a real snap to it, although even that is still pretty quiet. Listen to that rain out there, by the way. It's like festival of rain here today. It hasn't stopped raining since early this morning. It's absolutely chucking down. That's what you can hear. If you're not sure what a rangefinder is, I'll tell you. In fact, even better than that, I'll show you. A rangefinder sits under this housing, this top housing here of your camera, and when you turn the focusing ring, it's a little system of mirrors and prisms, and it just moves very slightly. Some of the little mirrors in there move very slightly, and when you turn the focusing mechanism, you'll see inside the viewfinder a split image, and when that split image comes together on the thing you want to focus on, boom, you're focused. And it's a really accurate focusing system. You might think these are simple cameras, these are very old cameras, it's all going to be approximate. No, it's not. Rangefinders are absolutely bang on. They're at least as good as an SLR when it comes to accuracy, and if it comes to that, a modern mirrorless camera too. Let's have a look at an actual rangefinder. I've got one somewhere. Here we are. This came out of a Zorky 4 like this one. Can we focus? Ha, there we are. So there is a rangefinder. That, oh, we're a bit bright there. That's better. That is the thing that actually focuses the image. So the lens, the back of the lens pushes on this little lever here. And that little lever, you might be able to see, makes this little mirror, this little prism, I think it might be a prism, it might be a mirror, it actually causes that to move. Can you see that moving? It's only moving very, very slightly, so you might not be able to see it clearly. But that is what happens when you turn the focusing ring on a rangefinder camera. That is what's doing the actual focusing. And here's the eyepiece here to which you put your eye. So that's what a rangefinder actually is. And they're really tiny things, and they're a beautiful little piece of, you know, micro engineering really from the age of machines. A lovely, lovely little thing. So if you think of a rangefinder, you might immediately think of a Leica, and I've got a couple of Leicas. This is the first Leica I bought. This is the Leica 2, beautiful little thing, and Leica have been associated with rangefinders, that's quite a loud one, for many, many years, and you would be forgiven for thinking of a Leica when rangefinders are mentioned. They were the pioneers very early on in the late 1920s or mid 1920s. A man called Oscar Barnack worked for the Lights Corporation, and he was a keen photographer, but he had asthma. So all that he had at the time, the camera he had at the time, I'm sort of pretending to hold it here. It's a great big glass plate camera, and you have to hold it like that on your shoulder. And of course, Oscar Barnack being asthmatic, this was a very difficult thing because it's a very heavy camera and it could bring on an asthma attack. Breathing's difficult, not a good idea. So he wanted a small camera. Being an optical engineer, he decided that he would design one. So in 1924, I think, saw the release of the UR Leica, and that was Oscar Barnack's first attempt at making a small portable camera that used cinema film, 35mm cinema film, running this way rather than this way vertically as it does in a movie camera. In a stills camera, Barnack turned it to run horizontally. The Leica wasn't the first camera to do that. There were other cameras doing that at the time, but the Leica was a very early one. Now shortly after that came the Leica 1, which was pretty much the Leica 2 without the rangefinder, and in 1932 we get this lovely Leica 2 with built-in rangefinder, advertised as automatic focusing at the time. And these are beautiful little cameras. I'll just pop it over here on the closer camera just so you can have a look. They're absolutely fantastic little things, just delightful. They're very, very simple. They're not complex cameras. They're all manual. They are slow to use because they have a separate viewfinder and rangefinder window. I'll just show you that here. So they have a separate viewfinder. This is the viewfinder window. This is the rangefinder window. So you focus through here and then you move your eye to the other window to compose. Well, now that's quite slow. And yeah, these are not very quick cameras to use. They're slightly difficult to load, slightly more difficult to load because you have to cut the leader a little bit. But if you use one of these cameras for a while and bond with it, you will get to love it. It's that kind of camera. This is the kind of camera that just becomes part of you. It's tiny, it fits perfectly into your hand. The ergonomics of the camera are all perfect. It's really, really simple. It's a light type box with shutter speeds what have we got, 1/25th to 1/500th of a second plus B. And that's it. It's got an M39 or an L39 mount, so it can mount all the L39 lenses. And if you get one of these cameras, you will love it if you use it and you practice using it and you bond with it and you let it become one with you. It's that kind of camera. It's the kind of camera that can become an extension of your eye, an extension of your arm, even though it's slow to use. So, you know, a fantastic machine. You can buy a good one of these for £300 with a lens or thereabouts, maybe 400 if it's absolutely pristine. If you want body only, then 120 to 150 pounds. Or you could get the Zorki copy for a lot cheaper. This is a Zorki copy. There are also Fed copies, and when I say copy, it is an exact copy, screw for screw, nut for nut, bolt for bolt. L39 mount, same range of shutter speeds, not as nicely polished, not as nicely finished, but still very nicely finished. A very nice camera, same system, rangefinder window and viewfinder window on the back there, and you can see that this is pretty much an identical machine to the Leica. This one's wearing an Industar 22 lens, which is a nice little f3.5 50mm. I found that to be a nicer lens than the Elmar, I've got to be honest. Let me know if you differ with that, but I think this is a nicer lens than the Elmar lens. And these cameras can be found for £40 to £60 with a lens. You will find them more expensive than that, but you can find them at £40 to £60 if you're patient. So that's a great alternative. There is no difference in actual operation, there's no difference in size, there's no difference in feel, and to all intents and purposes you really wouldn't know the difference. So if you're on a budget, the Zorki Fed copies are a great way to go. Also, the mirrors are better in the former Soviet cameras than they are in the Leica cameras. The mirrors fade in the Leica cameras. In the former Soviet cameras, they don't. So that is one thing that can be said that's actually better than the Leica in the former Soviet cameras. Well, now rangefinder use began to decline in the 1960s or thereabouts as professionals moved over to SLRs. It's much easier to change lenses with an SLR because you're looking through the lens, so you don't need a separate finder. With a rangefinder, you need a separate viewfinder for every different focal length you use. Generally, certainly with these early ones anyway, these Barnack style ones, generally you will need a separate finder for all those early cameras if you're changing lenses. So they began to be less and less popular. There were still many of them made for the consumer market, but generally the market began to go down. SLRs began to take over and the rangefinders began to become less popular. As I say, you still can buy a film rangefinder from Leica, also a digital rangefinder, and if Leica would like me to test any of those and compare them to this very early 1932 Leica, or indeed to any of these former Soviet rangefinders, and see how the latest thing compares, I would be more than happy to do so. I don't suppose they will, but if you'd like to, I'm here and ready and waiting. Please get in touch. Alright, now there are lots of other rangefinders you can buy for really not very much money. Many of them are former Soviet ones and many of them are not. I've got a few of them here. As I say, I've got a soft spot for rangefinders, so I've got a little bit of a collection. There are Fed and Zorki models. There's the Fed 2, that's a nice long base one. There's the Zorki 2, which I think I've featured on a review probably a couple of years ago. Actually, that camera was on here. I don't have one at the moment. There's the Fed 3 and the Zorki 3, and then there are the perennial favourites, the Fed 4, of which I've got one here, and the Zorky 4. Now all the cameras I've mentioned so far, that is the Zorky and Fed 1, the Zorky and Fed 2, the Zorky and Fed 3 and the Zorky and Fed 4, all have the same lens mount. That's the L39 lens mount. That's the same lens mount as this old Leica camera here. So on these cameras you can use all the Leica lenses, or you can use all of the Soviet lenses. And actually the Soviet lenses are so cheap and they're such good optics that, you know, actually I don't think there's much in it between them and the Leica lenses, if anything, and sometimes they're actually better. The Industar 22 is better than the Elmar. The Industar 50, in my experience anyway, is better than the Elmar. The Jupiter 8 is pretty much damn near as good as the Summit-R 50mm f2. So these former Soviet lenses are really fine optics, and you can use all of them on all of these rangefinder cameras. This is the Fed 4. This is the camera I learned photography on. These are really cheap. You can buy a good one of these for between 20 and 30 pounds if you're lucky. Certainly under 40 pounds you'll get a nice one of these, and it's a great camera because it's got a light meter built in. It's a bit tall and it's a bit ugly, but it's a good camera. Let me show you over here. There's the Fed 4 and there's the selenium cell for the light meter. Most of these, I've only ever had one of these selenium cells that didn't work. Rumour has it that they wear out and conk out over time. I've only found that to be true on one that I've ever handled, and I've probably handled 30 or 40 of these Fed 4s, so I think the rumours are unfounded. It's a nice looking camera. It's got some kind of, I don't know, former Soviet chic. It's got a bit of Cyrillic going on here. It's got chrome around the edges here, and it's generally a nice camera. It's got a lever wind, and it's got a nice near silent click. Really quiet. See how quiet that is. So this mechanism that was originally copied from the Leica 2, this mechanism persisted over the years, and you know, judging by that sound, that's a really quiet shutter sound. Judging by that shutter sound, that was a mechanism that was refined and taken care with as well. That's the Fed 4. The Zorky 4. This is a very stylish looking camera. I love the look of this camera. This has a lever wind and a top speed of 1/1000th, whereas the Fed has only 1/500th. Doesn't have a light meter, this one though, so it's not as easy to use. I'll give you a quick look at this camera. There we are, look at that. Isn't that a beautiful thing? A lovely old rangefinder from the age of machines. We'll wind it and fire it. And that's louder than the Fed. These Zorkies, they're good cameras, but they weren't quite as nicely finished as the Feds, I don't think. The Feds are always that bit more nicely finished, and they sound quieter too. The shutters sound quieter. So, you know, the Zorkies are good cameras, but the Feds are just that bit more nicely finished. I do love the design on these Zorkies, the way it has these cutouts and steps on the body. This is the rewind here. It's got a diopter adjuster here. And a self timer as well for film era selfies. So this is a lovely camera, and the lens it usually comes with, the Jupiter 8, that's an outstanding optic. You go a long way to find a lens nicer than this one. It's absolutely beautiful. Lovely out of focus areas, beautiful bokeh, I think that's the right word, and just a lovely machine and a lovely lens. Cost, I don't know, 40 to 60 pounds if you're patient. Certainly For that, probably you'll find them advertised up to £100, but you'll certainly get one between £40 and £60 if you use the requisite patience. Now, we've talked about the FSU L39 Leica copies. There was also a Contax copy as well, and this is it. This is the Kiev camera, and listen to this for a shutter sound. Whoa! These cameras have an air of mechanical perfection that is difficult to describe and difficult to get across, you know, on video. They're just exquisite. They're said to be, the later ones are said to be not terribly well made, but this is a later one from the late 70s, and it's just delicious. I can't help just clicking that shutter. It's beautiful. So these are slightly more complex cameras than the Leica copies, and they have that air of mechanical perfection that the Leica copies don't. There's the Kiev. Look at that lettering. Jupiter 8 lens there. Look at the coating on that lens. Is that not beautiful? These old machines are just gorgeous, and I'm determined to save as many of them as I can. There's the top plate. No light meter on this one. There's the back, combined viewfinder and rangefinder. So a little more complex. The mount is different. The focusing is very groovy and cool. You do it here, you can do it here with this little thing, this little wheel on the top here. So that's pretty nifty and pretty high tech for the 30s. So these cameras are just delicious and exquisite, but I don't think they're going to be as reliable over the long term. This one is holding up strong, and my 1955 one is holding up strong, but I've heard reports that they have strings inside the shutter mechanism, thin strings that can rot and break. I don't know. You pay your money and you take your choice. You can buy one of these for, I don't know, £60, 60 to £80, something like that. I'm kind of guessing. They're a bit more expensive than the than the Leica copies, but the lenses are less expensive. Why? Because they have no focusing mechanism in the lens. The focusing mechanism is in the body of the camera. Incredibly enough, it's actually in the bayonet itself. It's a bayonet mount, and it's in the camera. A direct copy of the Contax 1, I think, or perhaps the Contax 2. So you too can have the Frank Capra experience. He used a Contax back in the day, back in the when he was doing the wartime shots. You too can have that experience with one of these cameras. A very, very beautiful thing, and I'm just going to work that shutter once again, just because it's so lovely. Right. All right, that's all the former Soviet rangefinders. I said that rangefinders became less popular starting with the 60s. Well, they did, but there was still, the professional market declined a lot, but there was still a big consumer market, and this camera is an example of the kind of consumer rangefinder you could buy right into the 1970s. This is a Yashica Electro 35, and let's have a little look at this camera. I hope we can see it clearly. Let's bring up a bit of light. There we are. So this is a fairly large camera. It's fairly light. It has auto exposure, a simple aperture priority auto exposure system. It's powered by a battery. It's got an on switch, which I always forget which way to turn it. And there we are. And this is a nice quiet camera because it's got a leaf shutter. It's really quiet. How quiet is that? That's just astonishingly quiet. Oh, that's lovely. So still a simple camera. This one has a beautiful lens on it. This is not an interchangeable lens camera, and many of the rangefinders, the consumer rangefinders like this one from the 60s and 70s, have a fixed lens, but that's okay because the fixed lens on here really is quite a fixed lens. It's an f1.7, I think it's a 45mm lens, and it's just delicious, and it just makes the most stunning images. I shot this wide open as much as I could, and it worked beautifully for me time after time after time. I did not get one error in focusing, and incredibly, and this really blew me away, I didn't get one exposure error on the whole roll that I shot with this film. I shot a roll of Kodak Gold with it. Every single one was perfectly exposed. So the exposure system in this camera, and you know, almost certainly many of the other consumer rangefinder cameras of this time, but certainly on this one, the exposure system is unbeatable, better than well, quite a lot of digital cameras that I could mention, but won't because it might embarrass them. This camera, well, you can buy a good copy of this camera for around about £75 to £100, and it is well worth it. This is a camera that will work reliably for you time after time after time, and it's got a very cool name as well, Electro-35. I don't know many cameras with quite as cool a name as that. So there are loads of other rangefinders in that price range, and if you want something that's a bit more automated than these early Leica copy type rangefinders, then that's the ideal place to go. Get something from the 60s like this Yashica. So those are some nice rangefinders that you can buy that won't cost too much money. They're all fairly small and light, they're all simple, and they're all reliable, and none of them should really break the bank, and they all offer a really simple, enjoyable, engaging way into film photography. And if you form a bond with a rangefinder camera, the rangefinder experience is unique. It's different to an SLR, only subtly different, but it is different. And if you buy one and bond with one, you will shoot film on a rangefinder like shooting film on no other camera. So that's it from me for now. Many thanks to everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please don't forget to do all the usual YouTubey type things like liking, subscribing, and ringing of bells if you feel so inclined, and I hope you do. Many thanks to subscribers for your subscriptions, and many thanks go to patrons also for your continued support. We couldn't do on this channel what we do without the continued support of patrons, so many thanks for that. I guess that's it from me for now. So if you're not doing anything next time, please do drop in, join us, call in, check in for a spot more Zenography. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheerio all.